The pen fell to the Italian marble floor with a dry sound that echoed through the panoramic office. Garrett Beaumont didn't even bother to pick it up. He simply extended his hand, waiting for someone to appear to replace it, as always happened. His housekeeper, a young woman with brown eyes and a reserved posture, appeared at the door with a hesitant expression. "Mr. Beaumont, about my payment this month." He raised his hand, interrupting her without even looking in her direction. His eyes remained fixed on the financial charts scattered across the mahogany desk, numbers that confirmed what he already knew. He was the richest man in Seattle at 42 years old, owner of Beaumont Industries, an investment conglomerate that dominated the West Coast. Jade, right. Or was it June? Garrett finally turned his face, his expression showing the absolute boredom of someone who doesn't consider it relevant to memorize the names of subordinates. "I don't have time for these trivialities right now. Sort it out with my secretary." "Sir, I've tried 3 times this week. There's an error in the system and I haven't been paid for the last 2 months. My daughter is sick, and I need—" "Your daughter?" He let out a short laugh, devoid of humor. "Do you think your personal problems interest me? Do you think I built this empire worrying about the sob stories of incompetent employees?" Jade Morrison felt the blood freeze in her veins. She was 23 years old, a single mother of a 4-year-old girl with pneumonia, and every day in the Beaumont mansion was a battle against silent humiliation. But she needed that job. She needed that money. "Sir, please just help me resolve—" "You're fired." The words came from his mouth with the same naturalness as he would ask for coffee. "Gather your things and leave my property. Now." "What? But sir, I didn't do anything." "You questioned my authority. You invaded my private office. You interrupted my work with cheap drama." Garrett turned his attention back to the documents, as if she had ceased to exist. "You have 10 minutes before I call security, and don't expect references or severance. Consider yourself lucky. I'm not suing you for trespassing." Jade stood frozen for 3 seconds that felt like hours. Her eyes burning with tears she refused to shed in front of that man. Then she turned and left, her footsteps echoing down the polished stone corridor. Outside, the autumn rain fell in thick curtains over Seattle, transforming the October afternoon into a gray and desolate landscape. She had no umbrella, no proper coat, not enough money for a taxi to the small apartment in Rainier Valley, where her daughter, Mia, was waiting with a high fever under the care of the elderly neighbor. Jade descended the tree-lined hill of Laurelhurst under the downpour, soaked to the bone, carrying a plastic bag with her few belongings. That night, as she cradled her sleeping Mia in her thin arms, listening to the child's heavy breathing, Jade Morrison made a silent promise to herself. One day, somehow, she would rise, not for revenge, but for survival, for dignity, for her daughter. 15 years felt like an eternity, and a blink of an eye simultaneously. Garrett Beaumont watched the aged reflection in the fogged glass of the municipal bus window, line 42, taking him from the temporary shelter in Georgetown to downtown Seattle. His hair, once impeccably styled, now showed disheveled gray strands. The designer clothes had been replaced by a cheap suit bought at a thrift store, with stains he had unsuccessfully tried to disguise. The collapse of Beaumont Industries had been spectacular and public. A federal audit had revealed tax fraud schemes he didn't even directly oversee, but for which he was legally responsible. His main partner had disappeared to the Cayman Islands with most of the liquid funds. The lawsuits consumed everything that remained. The mansion in Laurelhurst, the imported cars, the offshore bank accounts, all evaporated in 18 months of lost legal battles. Now, at 57, Garrett was just another desperate man in a city that did not forgive failures. He had sent resumes to 147 companies. He had received 3 responses, all negative. His reputation preceded him like a toxic shadow that repelled any opportunity. The last chance had come unexpectedly, an email from Morrison Technologies, a software and artificial intelligence giant that had dominated the market for the past 10 years. The CEO, a woman known for inspiring stories of overcoming adversity, had personally requested an interview. Garrett didn't understand why, but he wasn't in a position to question miracles. The Morrison Tech building loomed in the financial district like a monolith of glass and steel, 50 floors of corporate success overshadowing everything around. Garrett passed through the revolving door, his worn shoes creaking on the polished granite floor, feeling the stares of well-dressed employees like invisible needles on his skin. The receptionist, a professional-looking Asian woman, checked his name in the system and pointed to the elevators. 50th floor, Mr. Beaumont. The CEO is waiting. The elevator ascended silently, only the soft hum of cutting-edge technology accompanying the rise. Garrett adjusted his tie for the 20th time, trying to control the tremor in his hands. He needed that job, whatever it was, in any position. His dignity had been buried along with his fortune. The doors opened to an elegant waiting room, decorated with sophisticated minimalism. An assistant guided him down a corridor to a pair of dark wooden double doors. She knocked twice, waited for a response, and opened. The office was larger than some apartments. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains in the background. And behind the executive desk, illuminated by the diffused afternoon light, sat a 38-year-old woman, dark hair neatly tied in a bun, wearing a gray suit that likely cost more than Garrett's monthly rent. It took 3 seconds for him to recognize her. The brown eyes were the same, but now they sparkled with a sharp confidence he didn't remember. The posture, once hunched and defensive, now radiated contained power. "Jade?" The word came out as an incredulous whisper. "Mr. Beaumont." She smiled, and in that smile were layers of meanings he couldn't fully decipher. "Please, have a seat. We have much to discuss." Garrett collapsed into the leather chair, his legs suddenly weak. Jade Morrison, the housekeeper he had fired in the rain with not a penny to her name, now commanded an empire valued in the billions. The irony was so brutal it almost felt physical. "You look surprised." Jade crossed her hands on the table, her fingers adorned with discreet but evidently expensive rings. "I imagine you didn't expect to see me again. Certainly not like this." "I didn't know." The words came out with difficulty. "I had no idea that I survived." She tilted her head slightly. "That I built something from nothing? That I didn't drown in that October rain when you threw me out like trash?" The silence that followed weighed tons. Garrett opened his mouth, closed it, tried to find words that justified the unjustifiable. "Do you know what I learned that day?" Jade continued, her voice calm but cutting like a scalpel. "I learned that people like you see people like me only as disposable tools, objects without history, without future, without value beyond immediate usefulness. Jade, CEO Morrison to you." The correction came soft, but firm. "And I'm here to listen, not to talk, although I imagine you don't have much to say that matters now." Garrett felt the weight of each word like stones in his chest, realizing he was not there for a common job interview, but for something much more complex and painful. Garrett swallowed hard, feeling the cheap suit's collar scratch against his skin. The woman before him was no longer the timid figure he had ruthlessly fired. Jade Morrison commanded that space with a magnetic presence he himself had never possessed, not even in his glory days. His fortune had been inherited, expanded through aggressive and often unethical decisions. Hers, he realized now, had been forged in adversity. "Do you want to know how I got here?" Jade broke the silence, rising from her chair and walking to the panoramic window. The afternoon light outlined her profile against the gray Seattle sky. "That night, after you fired me, my daughter got worse. The fever rose so high that I had to carry her through the rain to the emergency room. 4 kilometers on foot, because I didn't have money for a taxi." Garrett wanted to say something, anything, but the words died in his throat. He watched her turn slightly, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The hospital bill was devastating. I fell into debt that took 3 years to pay off. 3 years cleaning offices at night, working 2 shifts, sleeping 4 hours a day. She paused, and Garrett noticed the tension in her shoulders, even through the impeccable fabric of her blazer. But there was a public library that stayed open until midnight. While Mia slept in the children's chairs, I studied. Programming, software design, artificial intelligence. Jade turned to face him directly, and the intensity of those brown eyes made him involuntarily recoil in his chair. I had an idea. A hospital management system that would reduce administrative errors like the one that delayed my payment. I wrote the code on public computers, piece by piece, over 18 months. When I finally had a functional prototype, I presented it to 5 different hospitals. 4 ignored me. The 5th, Seattle Grace Memorial, decided to take a chance. She returned to the table but didn't sit down. She stood, positioning herself so he had to tilt his neck to meet her gaze, completely reversing the power dynamic that had once existed between them. The system worked. It reduced costs by 23% in the first year. Other hospitals started to seek us out. In 5 years, my small startup was valued at $80 million. In 10, we surpassed $1 billion. Today, Morrison Technologies employs 12,000 people in 7 countries. Garrett felt each word like a meticulously calculated punch. They weren't delivered with anger or obvious triumphalism, but with a calm factuality that made everything more devastating. She didn't need to brag. The facts spoke for themselves. And you? Jade finally sat down again, crossing her legs with casual elegance. I read about your fall. It was meticulously documented by the financial press. Tax fraud, embezzlement, partner abandonment. Not much different from how you treated me, come to think of it. A consistent pattern of behavior. I didn't know about the fraud, Garrett managed to articulate, his voice hoarse. My partner. Your partner did exactly what you allowed through years of negligence and arrogance. The response came quick, precise. I read the complete court reports, Garrett. I can call you Garrett now since you're no longer in a position to demand formalities. You signed documents without reading, authorized transactions without oversight, built an empire on rotten foundations because you were too busy feeling superior to do the real work. Garrett's hands trembled on his knees. Everything she said was true, and the truth burned more than any invented insult could burn. Why did you call me here? He finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. To humiliate? To take revenge? I would understand. I deserve it. For the first time, something different crossed Jade's face. It wasn't compassion exactly, but perhaps a shadow of understanding about the cyclical nature of human destruction. Revenge is a luxury for people who have nothing better to do, she replied, opening a folder on the table. I've spent the last 15 years building, not destroying. But when I saw your name cross our human resources system, I recognized an opportunity. Not for revenge, but for balance. Garrett watched her pull a document from the folder, sliding it across the polished surface until it stopped in front of him. It was a job contract, several pages stapled with military precision. You're hired, Jade announced, and for a moment, Garrett's heart leaped with absurd hope. As a night janitor, your hours will be from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., Monday to Saturday. State minimum wage, no health benefits in the first year, no profit sharing, no bonuses. You will clean bathrooms, empty trash cans, mop the hallways that real executives walk during the day. Hope died as quickly as it was born, replaced by a nauseating understanding of what was happening. This was not charity. It was a meticulously designed lesson. You can't, he began, but her expression silenced him. I can refuse your application completely, Jade interrupted, her voice maintaining that surgical calm. You sent a resume to us. We responded. This is the position available for someone with your current qualifications. which consist of a destroyed reputation and 0 valid professional references. Accept or decline, I don't care. But she did care, Garrett realized. Not in the sense of wanting his acceptance or refusal particularly, but in the sense of having architected that moment with watchmaker precision. Every word, every pause, every detail of the contract was designed to mirror exactly what he had done to her 15 years ago. No references, he murmured, recognizing his own words returning like ghosts. No references, Jade confirmed, just as you denied me. And if you decide that the job is beneath your dignity, I will understand perfectly. I'm sure other opportunities will arise for you, perhaps in another city, another state. Although, by my calculations, you've already exhausted goodwill in all the major metropolitan areas on the West Coast. Garrett took the contract with trembling hands, his eyes scanning clauses that confirmed every word she had said. There was even a special section on expected conduct, which included universal respect for all employees regardless of hierarchical position, and recognition that no honest work is undignified. Do you have family? Jade asked suddenly, and the question caught him off guard. Divorced for 8 years, no children. The answer came automatically, monotonously. Then you have only yourself to support. Interesting. She opened a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. My daughter Mia is 19 now, studying computer science at Stanford. First-generation college student. She doesn't know you exist, and I intend to keep it that way. But every time you clean a bathroom in this building, I want you to remember her at 4 years old, feverish, while I carried her through the storm because you didn't consider our humanity worthy of a dime. Garrett closed his eyes, the image she painted piercing through his already shattered defenses. He had never thought of the housekeeper as a real person with a real life and real problems. She had been just an inconvenience, an irritating buzz in his perfect afternoon. Why not just reject me? He opened his eyes, finding hers. Why this staging? Because rejection would be too easy. You would continue to be a victim, blaming the universe, the economy, your treacherous partner. But by accepting this job, you will have to face reality every day. You will see people working honestly at all levels, from reception to the boardroom. You will learn, perhaps for the first time in your life, that dignity does not come from titles or bank accounts. Jade stood up again, indicating that the meeting was coming to an end. The contract expires in a year. If you survive that period without being fired for incompetence or insubordination, you will receive a standard reference letter. Nothing special, but enough to get another position somewhere. Until then, welcome to Morrison Technologies, Mr. Beaumont. Or should I say, just Beaumont? Janitors usually don't receive formal treatment here. She extended her hand, a formal gesture of business conclusion. Garrett looked at that hand, small but firm, and understood that he was being offered not clemency, but consequence. Slowly, he took the pen she had slid along with the contract and signed his name on the indicated lines. Each letter, a renunciation of the man he had been. When he shook her hand, the firmness of the grip communicated exactly what needed to be said. The first night began at 11 sharp, marked by the electronic beep of the time clock in the basement of Morrison Technologies. Garrett swiped the magnetic card that had been handed to him by an indifferent supervisor, a middle-aged Latino man named Carlos Ruiz, who had evaluated him with a tired but not hostile gaze. "You're the new one?" Carlos asked, handing him a dark blue uniform still folded. "Changing room is over there. 5 minutes to change, then I'll show you the route." The changing room smelled of disinfectant and old sweat, with rows of scratched metal lockers and a worn wooden bench in the center. Garrett slowly undressed, folding the cheap suit that represented the last remnants of his former identity. The uniform hung loosely on his emaciated body, the years of stress having consumed the muscle mass he had never bothered to maintain. On the breast pocket, embroidered in discreet letters, read simply, "Maintenance." When he emerged, Carlos was waiting for him with a supply cart that jingled slightly with every movement. We start on the 50th floor and go down. Executive offices first, then intermediate floors, ground floor last. 6 hours for 50 floors. Questions? No, Garrett replied, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. Small and contained. Then let's go. And one thing. Carlos stopped, turning to face him directly. I don't know who you were before and I don't care. Down here, everyone started somewhere. Do your job right, treat everyone with respect, and we'll get along. Got it? Garrett nodded, recognizing the veiled warning. Carlos had probably seen dozens like him over the years. Fallen men trying to rebuild fragments of dignity through honest work, some succeeding, others sinking even further. The service elevator was different from the ones Garrett had used during the day, smaller and more utilitarian, without glass panels or background music. It ascended with a mechanical hum that seemed louder in the nighttime silence of the building. When the doors opened on the 50th floor, Garrett immediately recognized the corridor leading to Jade's office. The lights were dimmed to night mode, casting long shadows that transformed the familiar space into something almost alien. The CEO's office is the last one we clean on this floor, Carlos instructed, pushing the cart down the corridor. She usually leaves around 8, but leaves work marked for review. Don't touch anything on the desks, just empty trash, vacuum, clean windows. Understood? Understood. The next 2 hours were a brutal education in physical labor. Garrett learned that emptying 50 trash cans was more demanding than it seemed, that vacuuming without leaving marks on the carpet required specific technique, that streak-free windows demanded the exact angle of pressure with the microfiber cloth. His back began to ache before the 20th floor. His hands, never accustomed to more than holding pens and shaking corporate hands, developed blisters that burst and burned. Carlos watched with clinical attention, correcting techniques, demonstrating more efficient methods. There was no cruelty in his supervision, just the pragmatic expectation of minimum competence. When Garrett stumbled over his own cart for the 3rd time, dropping a bottle of multi-surface cleaner that shattered on the marble floor, the supervisor merely sighed. Grab the mop over there, clean it up before someone slips, and watch where you step. I can't babysit you all night. It was 2:40 a.m. when they finally reached Jade's office. The door was unlocked, per protocol for nighttime cleaning. Garrett hesitated on the threshold, memories of the previous afternoon flooding his mind with visceral force. Carlos noticed the pause. Problem? No, just trying to orient myself. It's an office like any other. Go in, do the work, leave. Simple as that. But it wasn't simple. Every detail of that space carried symbolic weight that threatened to crush Garrett. The chair where he had sat pleading, the desk where Jade had slid the contract that sealed his fate, the windows revealing Seattle asleep under a starless sky polluted by urban light. He started with the trash can next to the desk, emptying crumpled papers and empty protein bar wrappers. An open planner showed appointments written in elegant handwriting. Board meeting, 9 a.m., Forbes interview, 2 p.m., charity dinner for Children's Hospital, 7 p.m. Each item a window into a life of achievements he had never understood the value of. Don't go reading personal things, Carlos warned, although his tone was more educational than accusatory. Privacy is part of the job. Trust is everything here. Garrett stepped away from the desk, grabbing the vacuum and starting to move across the carpet in methodical lines. The mechanical noise filled the silence, giving him something to focus on beyond his own thoughts. But when he crouched down to clean under the side table near the window, his eyes caught something that made him stop. A small, discreet framed photograph, easily overlooked by anyone not looking. It showed Jade much younger, holding a child of perhaps 4 years with dark curls and a toothless smile. Both wore simple clothes, standing in some public park with playground equipment in the background. And the happiness captured in that moment was so genuine it hurt to observe. Mia, the daughter he had reduced to an abstract inconvenience on that rainy afternoon 15 years ago, the feverish child who had been carried miles through the storm because of his calculated indifference. Now at Stanford, studying, building a future, completely unaware of the man who had almost destroyed everything before it even began. Finished here? Carlos appeared in the doorway, checking the clock. We need to keep up the pace. Yes, I'm done. Garrett stood up, his joints protesting, and followed the supervisor back down the corridor, but the image of that photograph remained etched in his retina like a branding iron. The following floors blurred into a numbing repetition of identical tasks. Trash, vacuum, clean, descend. Trash, vacuum, clean, descend. Garrett occasionally crossed paths with other members of the night crew. A Somali woman cleaning bathrooms with silent efficiency. A young man with a Midwestern accent, waxing floors while listening to music on old headphones. An elderly Vietnamese woman pushing a cart of replacement toilet paper and soap. Each greeted with a courteous wave or brief murmur, then continued with their work. No one asked where he came from. No one speculated about his past. There was a peculiar democracy in that night shift, an equality forged in shared invisibility. They were the ones who kept the corporate world running while the corporate world slept, ghosts who made everything perfect for others to take credit for at dawn. When the clock struck 5 a.m., Garrett felt every muscle in his body screaming in agony. His hands bled slightly where the blisters had completely burst. A dull pain throbbed at the base of his spine, radiating into his legs. But Carlos maintained the relentless pace, 40 years of experience making him seemingly immune to the fatigue that devastated the rookie. Ground floor now, the supervisor announced. Main lobby, public restrooms, reception area. Last step. The lobby that had seemed so intimidating when Garrett had crossed it the previous afternoon now revealed itself as just another space to be cleaned. The polished granite required special technique to avoid leaving streaks. The enormous facade windows demanded a mobile platform that Carlos operated with casual ease, while Garrett held tools and wiped down surfaces. 6:30, an hour before the end of the shift. Pre-dawn light began to brighten the sky to the east, transforming Seattle from a black silhouette into a gray city gradually gaining definition. The first administrative employees would start to arrive in 30 minutes. Garrett and the others needed to disappear before then, returning to the invisible basement from which they came. First day is always the hardest, Carlos commented as they stored equipment in the supply closet. Body adjusts in a week, more or less. You fell behind a few times, but it wasn't terrible. Show up tomorrow on time. Keep trying. It was the closest to praise Garrett had heard in months, and absurdly he felt something dangerously akin to warm pride expanding in his exhausted chest. 7 o'clock. Beep of the time clock. Garrett swiped the magnetic card, the electronic sound marking the official end of his first shift as a janitor at Morrison Technologies. In the changing room, he stripped off the sweat-soaked uniform, feeling each movement as torture. The mirror reflected an unrecognizable man, deep-set eyes surrounded by dark circles, disheveled hair, hunched posture from exhaustion. But there was something different in that reflection, something he couldn't quite name. Perhaps the absence of the arrogance that had once masked his inner emptiness. Perhaps the microscopic beginning of something that could, eventually, with work and time, resemble genuine humility. Outside, Seattle's morning awakened with its usual urban cacophony. Garrett emerged from the basement, wearing the cheap suit again, blending into the flow of workers starting their daytime shifts. No one looked twice at him. He was just another anonymous face in the crowd, indistinguishable, forgettable. And for the first time in decades, Garrett Beaumont did not feel offended by his own insignificance, just infinitely, deeply tired. The bus on line 42 crossed Georgetown in the weak morning light, carrying silent workers in its worn seats. Garrett rested his head against the cold window, watching the city awaken through eyes that burned with exhaustion. Each jolt of the vehicle sent waves of pain through muscles he hadn't even known he possessed. His hands, wrapped in makeshift bandages made of paper towels and tape found in the changing room, throbbed with their own heat. The temporary shelter where he had settled 3 months ago was in a converted building that had once been a fish processing factory. The smell never completely disappeared, lingering in the concrete walls like a persistent olfactory memory. 32 men shared the space, sleeping in military precision bunk beds, each with a small locker for belongings and nothing more. The rules were simple. No alcohol, no drugs, no violence. Out by 7 a.m., return allowed only after 6 p.m. Garrett had 3 hours before being expelled to the streets. 3 hours to try to sleep on a thin mattress that smelled of disinfectant and other people's sweat, surrounded by snores and coughs, and occasionally someone screaming in nightmares. He dragged himself to his bunk, number 17 in the 3rd row, and collapsed without even taking off his shoes. Sleep came instantaneously and dreamlessly, a fall into a black abyss that swallowed consciousness completely. When he awoke to the loud alarm of the general call at 10 a.m., it took several seconds to remember where he was and why. His body protested violently at the slightest movement, as if every muscle fiber had been individually beaten during the night. The line for the communal showers snaked through the narrow hallway. Garrett waited his turn in silence, observing the other residents at various stages of defeat and resilience. The man in front of him, a veteran of Afghanistan with faded military tattoos on his arms, murmured something inaudible to himself. Behind him, a young man who couldn't be more than 20 stared at the floor with empty eyes that had seen too much. The warm water fell on his battered back like simultaneous blessing and torture. Garrett stood under the weak stream for 10 precious minutes, watching dirt and diluted blood spiral down the drain. When he emerged, wrapped in rough institutional towels, he felt marginally more human, although exhaustion remained embedded in his bones. Mas ao se aproximar do escritório dela, viu a luz filtrada pelas venezianas e uma sombra de movimento sugeriu que ela ainda estava lá. Hesitou, considerando se deveria voltar mais tarde, mas a necessidade de completar sua tarefa o levou a bater levemente na porta. Entre. A voz de Jade soou, firme e direta. Ele entrou e a cena era familiar. Jade estava de pé, olhando pela janela, uma xícara de chá nas mãos. Mas algo estava diferente. Havia uma tensão no ar, um peso que não era apenas o da responsabilidade que ela carregava. Garrett, ela disse, sem olhar para ele. Preciso que limpe o escritório. Vou ter uma reunião em breve. Sim, senhora, ele respondeu, movendo-se para começar sua rotina. Enquanto esvaziava o lixo, notou que a mesa dela estava coberta de papéis, relatórios e gráficos. A pressão que emanava dela era palpável, e ele hesitou, sentindo que havia algo mais que precisava ser dito. Você está sobrecarregada, ele disse, a voz saindo mais firme do que esperava. Talvez devesse tirar um tempo para si mesma. Jade virou-se surpresa. Você acha que pode me dar conselhos sobre como gerenciar meu tempo? A pergunta era desafiadora, mas havia uma curiosidade subjacente. Não sou ninguém para dar conselhos, Garrett admitiu, mas vejo o quanto você se esforça. Às vezes, é preciso parar e respirar. Ela o avaliou por um momento e então, algo em seu olhar suavizou. Você realmente se importa com isso, não é? Sim, ele respondeu, sentindo a sinceridade em suas palavras. Eu vejo o que você faz. E não é só sobre o trabalho. É sobre as vidas que você toca. Jade baixou os olhos, e por um momento, o peso da responsabilidade parecia um pouco mais leve. É fácil esquecer que existem pessoas lá fora, que isso é mais do que apenas números e resultados. Garrett terminou de limpar a mesa, e enquanto o fazia, sentiu que havia uma conexão se formando entre eles, uma compreensão mútua que transcendeu suas posições. Você não precisa carregar isso sozinha. Ele disse mais uma vez, a voz suave. Todos nós temos nossas lutas, e todos nós precisamos de apoio. Você está certo, Jade finalmente admitiu, e a vulnerabilidade em sua voz era quase palpável. Às vezes parece que estou lutando contra um mar de indiferença, mas você me faz lembrar que ainda há humanidade nisso tudo. A conversa fluiu naturalmente. E Garrett começou a compartilhar suas experiências, as lições que aprendera nas últimas semanas. Ele falou sobre as histórias que ouvira no abrigo, as vidas que se entrelaçavam em sua própria jornada. Jade escutava atentamente, e ele percebeu que, por trás da fachada de CEO, havia uma mulher que também carregava suas próprias cicatrizes. Eu não sou perfeita, Jade disse. Sua voz agora mais suave. Mas estou tentando fazer a diferença. Às vezes, sinto que estou sozinha nessa luta. Você não está. Garrett respondeu, sentindo a conexão se fortalecer. Todos nós estamos juntos nisso, mesmo que não percebamos. Quando a reunião se aproximou, Jade se recompôs, mas havia uma nova leveza em sua postura. Obrigada, Garrett, por me lembrar do que realmente importa. Estou aqui para isso, ele disse sorrindo. E se precisar de alguém para conversar, estarei por perto. Ela assentiu, e quando ele saiu do escritório, sentiu que algo havia mudado. Não apenas em Jade, mas também nele. A compreensão de que, mesmo nas posições mais altas, as pessoas ainda enfrentam suas batalhas, e que a empatia pode ser uma força poderosa. As semanas seguintes trouxeram mais interações entre eles. Jade começou a reconhecer Garrett não apenas como um funcionário, mas como alguém que realmente se importava. Ele a via em momentos de vulnerabilidade, e ela o via como mais do que apenas um zelador. Havia um respeito mútuo crescendo, uma conexão que desafiava as barreiras que antes os separavam. Garrett continuou a trabalhar duro, mas agora havia um propósito renovado em suas ações. Ele não estava apenas limpando, estava contribuindo para um ambiente que poderia, de alguma forma, ajudar a mudar vidas. E Jade, por sua vez, começou a ver seu trabalho sob uma nova luz, entendendo que cada tarefa, cada esforço, era parte de algo maior. Na 10ª semana, durante uma pausa, Garrett e Carlos conversaram sobre o programa de treinamento vocacional que Derek mencionara. Você já pensou em se inscrever? Carlos perguntou, observando Garrett com um olhar avaliativo. Estou considerando, Garrett respondeu. Acho que poderia aprender algo útil. Você deveria. Não é só sobre o trabalho. É sobre se preparar para o futuro. E você merece isso. As palavras de Carlos ressoaram em Garrett. Ele percebeu que ao longo de sua jornada havia se tornado mais do que apenas um sobrevivente. Ele estava se transformando em alguém que poderia contribuir, que poderia fazer a diferença. E isso era algo que nunca imaginara que poderia ser possível. Enquanto as noites se transformavam em semanas, Garrett começou a se inscrever em cursos online, explorando novas habilidades e conhecimentos. Ele se sentia mais vivo do que nunca, e a ideia de um futuro, uma vida além do abrigo, começou a se concretizar em sua mente. E assim, a vida continuava, implacável e indiferente, mas agora com um novo sentido de propósito e conexão. Garrett e Jade, cada um em sua própria jornada, estavam lentamente se aproximando, não apenas como CEO e zelador, mas como seres humanos que se entendiam, que se apoiavam, que estavam dispostos a lutar juntos por um mundo melhor. But as he turned the corner toward his office, he heard something that made him stop abruptly. A muffled sound of crying, coming from behind the slightly open door. It wasn't loud or dramatic sobbing, but the contained tears of someone used to not allowing weakness to show publicly. Every instinct screamed at him to retreat, to leave that private moment untouched. But something deeper, more recent, compelled him to knock gently on the door. The crying stopped instantly. Silence for 3 heartbeats, then Jade's voice, controlled but slightly hoarse. Come in. She was sitting at the table, laptop open in front of her, but she wasn't looking at the screen. Her eyes were red, though no tears were visible now, and her posture was that of someone trying to compose herself through sheer willpower. I'm sorry, Garrett said immediately. I can come back later. No, stay. Jade gestured vaguely, then seemed to realize the futility of the facade. My daughter had a car accident. Nothing serious, she's fine, but... Her voice faltered imperceptibly. For a moment, when the hospital called, I was back to that night, carrying her through the rain, not knowing if I could save her. Garrett stood still, completely out of his depth, but unable to simply leave. Trauma doesn't just disappear because we build things on top of it, he said slowly, the words coming from a new and painful understanding. It waits for moments of weakness to resurface. Jade looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully decipher. Surprise, perhaps, or reluctant recognition of a shared truth. You seem to speak from experience. I'm learning. Slowly. Garrett set the card aside, an unconscious movement of someone committing to being present, rather than just passing through. I built an empire on a rotten foundation, thinking the weight would crush inconvenient memories. It only worked until everything collapsed. And now? Jade asked, her voice gaining strength again, genuine curiosity replacing momentary vulnerability. Now I'm trying to build something different. I don't know what yet. Maybe just a version of myself that can look in the mirror without feeling nauseous. He hesitated, then continued. Is your daughter okay? Really? She is. Scrapes, a scare. Car wrecked, but she's unharmed. The other driver ran a red light. Mia had quick reflexes. Jade closed the laptop, a decisive movement of someone putting work aside. She was coming back from the library, studying for an exam, always so dedicated, so focused. She learned from her mother, Garrett said, and it wasn't flattery but a simple observation of an obvious fact. Jade smiled, small but genuine. I suppose so, though I hope she also learns to pause occasionally, something I'm still mastering. She looked at him with the focused attention she always carried. You've changed since that first interview. Not dramatically, but there's something different. I'm starting to understand that dignity doesn't come from position, but from how we treat the journey, no matter where it takes us. Garrett picked up the vacuum, returning to the purpose that had brought him there. And that sometimes the greatest kindness we can offer is allowing others to be human, even when, especially when, they have power over us. He began his work, and Jade allowed the silence to settle, not uncomfortable, but contemplative. When he finished and prepared to leave, she spoke one last time. Thank you for not running away when you found weakness. Garrett paused at the door, turning slightly. We all carry something. I learned that in the last 8 weeks. And then he left, leaving the CEO alone with her thoughts and memories that not even billions could erase completely. The third month brought changes that Garrett hadn't anticipated. Carlos summoned him at the start of the shift, with an expression that mixed approval and something close to paternal pride. The day supervisor needs someone to cover a 2-week absence. I recommended you. Hours will be from 7 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon. Same pay, but it's a chance to show you can do more. Working during the day meant seeing the Morrison Technologies building in a completely different light. The lobby he cleaned in the quiet of night was now bustling with hundreds of employees arriving, chatting, carrying coffees and backpacks. Garrett wore the same uniform, pushed the same cart, but now he was visible. People passed by him, some offering polite nods, others completely ignoring him, absorbed in phone calls or urgent conversations. It was strange to witness the daytime life of a place he had only known asleep. He saw Lisa Chen cross the lobby every morning at 8:15, always with headphones on and an expression of someone already mentally solving problems. He saw executives leaving trash that he would empty later, saw assistants rushing with documents, saw the frenetic pace of a company that never stopped growing. On the 4th day of the daytime shift, Garrett was cleaning a spill on the 28th floor when a group of executives passed by, heatedly discussing quarterly projections. A woman in a gray suit, tablet tucked under her arm, stopped abruptly upon seeing him. "You're new here during the day?" she asked, not rudely, but with the professional curiosity of someone who noticed details. "Covering a temporary absence," Garrett replied, keeping his eyes on his work. "Well, welcome to the daytime madness." She smiled briefly before hurrying to catch up with her colleagues. But the brief exchange left Garrett with a strange feeling. Normalcy. casual human interaction without the weight of history or judgment. During his lunch break, he sat in the small outdoor patio reserved for employees, eating a simple sandwich he had bought from a nearby food truck. Amina, the Somali woman from the night shift, also worked a few daytime hours. She joined him on the bench, opening a lunchbox that exuded spices Garrett couldn't identify. "Different, isn't it?" she said, her English heavy with accent but perfectly understandable. "Seeing everyone during the day, they don't think about us, but we think about them." "How so?" Garrett asked, genuinely curious. "We clean their spaces. We see photos on desks. Personal papers sometimes in the trash. We know lives without them knowing we know." Amina chewed thoughtfully. "It's a strange power. The invisibility that reveals everything." Garrett considered this, realizing the deep truth in her words. For months he had observed fragments of others' lives, piecing together narratives from the evidence left behind. He knew more about some employees than they would suspect possible. "Have you been doing this for a long time?" he asked. 12 years. I came from Somalia with 3 children. My husband died in the war. This job has allowed me to raise them. Now my oldest is in community college, studying nursing." Pride lit up her tired face. "She's going to help real people, like the CEO here does. Jade Morrison." Garrett said the name carefully, testing how it sounded in casual context. "Yes, she's good. Not just for business. For people." Amina finished her meal, closing the lunchbox with precision. She knows what it's like to struggle. She hasn't forgotten. When Garrett returned to work, he carried Amina's words like a comforting weight. The empire Jade had built wasn't just about financial success, but about memory embodied in action. Every policy, every decision filtered through a lens formed on that rainy night 15 years ago. On the 7th day of the daytime shift, Garrett was cleaning the conference room after a morning meeting when Jade unexpectedly walked in, accompanied by 2 executives. She saw him immediately, a brief recognition crossing her expression before returning her attention to her colleagues. "We need to review the numbers before the investor presentation," she said, gesturing to the projection still on the screen. "Our margin in the hospital sector has increased 18%, but operational costs have also risen." Garrett worked silently, becoming part of the furniture as he had learned, but he couldn't help but overhear fragments of the discussion. Jade navigated complex data with an ease that suggested absolute mastery of every aspect of her business. She was not a decorative CEO or a spokesperson. She was the genuine architect of everything Morrison Technologies represented. When he finished and prepared to leave, one of the executives asked for water. Garrett instinctively turned to fetch it, but Jade stopped him with a subtle gesture. "There's a dispenser in the hallway," she said to her colleague, then briefly looked at Garrett. "He has other floors to cover." It was discreet protection, recognition that even in corporate hierarchy, there were boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. Garrett nodded imperceptibly and left, carrying the understanding that Jade paid attention to more details than she let on. The following days of the daytime shift revealed more layers. Garrett witnessed a birthday celebration on the 35th floor, employees sharing cake and genuine laughter. He saw a young engineer receiving news of a promotion, his face lighting up with joy that transcended hierarchical differences. He also witnessed difficult moments, someone crying quietly in the bathroom after harsh feedback, palpable tension before an important presentation. Humanity happened in every corner, constantly, regardless of who was observing. On the last day before returning to the night shift, Garrett encountered Lisa Chen again, this time in the elevator. She recognized him immediately, a tired but genuine smile appearing. "Philosopher janitor, I didn't know you were working days now." "Temporary. I'm back to nights tomorrow." "Oh, I'm going to miss our nighttime encounters." She adjusted the heavy backpack on her shoulder. "We finally solved that latency issue. Your advice to step back worked." I came back the next day, and the error was glaringly obvious. I'm glad it helped, Garrett said sincerely. You know, you're a good listener. You should consider doing something with that professionally. Lisa got off on the 35th floor, waving before the doors closed. The casual suggestion lingered with Garrett for the rest of the day. Good listener. Throughout his previous life, he had spoken, ordered, decided. Never simply listened. Now, forced into silence by the position he occupied, he had discovered a skill he hadn't known he possessed. That night, back at the shelter, Derek mentioned the vocational training program again. A new cycle starts next week. There's still time to sign up. Garrett considered seriously for the first time. He was 57, his body beginning to show the wear of physical work, but his mind was finally awakening after decades of moral atrophy. Perhaps there was a future beyond simply surviving day by day. What did you sign up for? He asked Derek. Plumbing. There's always a need for plumbers, and it pays decently. You should try electrical. Cleaner work, less hard on the body. The next morning, before his shift, Garrett stopped by the administrative office of the shelter and picked up an application form. The questions were simple, straightforward. Name, age, previous experience, goals. He filled it out slowly, each word a commitment to a future he still couldn't fully visualize but was beginning to believe was possible. Back in the night shift, there was comforting familiarity. Carlos greeted him with a wave. Miguel shared strong coffee from his thermos. Amina murmured blessings as they passed in the hallways. The quiet rhythm of night work embraced Garrett like the hug of an old friend. In the early hours of the morning, he found himself again on the 50th floor. Jade's office door was ajar, dim light suggesting she was working late again. Garrett hesitated, then knocked softly. Come in. She was reviewing documents, reading glasses he had never seen her wear perched on her nose. She looked at him with an expression that mixed fatigue and something softer. Back to the night shift, she observed. Yes, the daytime was enlightening. How so? Garrett began emptying the trash, organizing his thoughts as he worked. Seeing the place alive. Understanding that every person here carries their own story, their own struggle. They're not just numbers or functions, but complex humans trying to build something meaningful. Jade removed her glasses, studying him with focused attention. A simple lesson that took you 3 months to learn. Simple for those who have always known. Revolutionary for someone who spent a lifetime blind. He paused, turning to face her directly. I signed up for the training program. Electrical. Trying to build a real skill. Something beyond just surviving. For the first time, something genuinely close to approval crossed Jade's face. It wasn't forgiveness or absolution, but recognition of effort directed forward instead of merely lamenting the past. Your contract ends in 4 months, she said, returning to the documents. Standard reference letter as agreed, assuming there are no issues. What you do after that is your choice. I understand, and I appreciate the opportunity, even knowing it wasn't offered out of kindness. It wasn't. Jade put her glasses back on, signaling a return to work. But perhaps it has transformed into something beyond a lesson or punishment. Perhaps it has become possibility. Garrett finished his task in silence, leaving Jade with her documents and thoughts. As he pushed the cart down the quiet corridor, he felt something unknown expanding in his chest. It wasn't exactly happiness, nor complete redemption. It was something subtler and perhaps more valuable, a sense of purpose built on genuine humility and honest work. The rest of the shift passed in familiar rhythm, trash, vacuuming, cleaning, descending. But each task now carried a different weight. It wasn't just penance or survival. It was contribution, small but real, to the functioning of something larger than himself. When the shift ended and Garrett emerged into the Seattle morning, the city was waking under a sky that promised rain. But this time, unlike that night 15 years ago when Jade had been expelled under a storm, He had destination, purpose, and the fragile beginning of something that could eventually resemble regained dignity. The future remained uncertain, marked by scars that would never completely disappear. But for the first time in years, Garrett Beaumont walked toward it with open eyes, calloused hands from honest work, and a heart slowly learning to see humanity where once there had only been indifference.